You have hundreds of contacts in your phone, thousands of connections on social media, yet when crisis hits, you realize you're completely alone. No one to call at 2 a.m. No one who truly knows you, no one you'd trust with your deepest fears. This isn't failure. According to the Stoics, it might be exactly where wisdom begins. Seneca had a student who complained bitterly about his lack of friends. The young man was wealthy, educated, and socially active, yet he felt profoundly isolated. Seneca's response shocked him. "You think you lack friends? Good, that means you're finally seeing clearly." The Stoics had a radically different view of friendship than our modern culture. They didn't measure it by quantity, frequency of contact, or mutual entertainment. They saw friendship as something rare, demanding, and completely separate from popularity or social connection. Today you're discovering what the lack of friends really means, according to Stoic philosophy, and why it might be the wake-up call that changes everything. Subscribe to Stoic Forge if you're ready for uncomfortable truths about relationships and self-reliance. Now let's explore what your loneliness is actually telling you. The lack of friends means you've been confusing companionship with friendship. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius around 63 AD. "I don't count companions at the dinner table as friends any more than I count fellow travelers on a road trip as friends. They're sharing space, not life." This distinction devastates most people when they first encounter it. You thought you had 20 friends. The Stoics would say you have 20 companions, 20 people you do activities with, but possibly 0 actual friends. What's the difference? Companions are there for mutual benefit, shared entertainment, or convenient proximity. Friends are there when nothing benefits them, when entertainment is impossible, when proximity requires effort. Companions disappear during crisis. Friends appear. Marcus Aurelius learned this as emperor from 61 to 80 AD. When he ascended to power, he suddenly had thousands of friends, seeking favor, offering advice, competing for access. When the Antonine Plague devastated Rome starting in 1605 AD, and he needed honest counsel about impossible decisions, most of those friends vanished. They were companions attracted to his position, not friends connected to his character. In his Meditations, Marcus wrote, "The greatest blessing of wealth is that it shows you who your friends are not." He meant that power and prosperity attract companions like flies to honey, but adversity reveals the handful of actual friends. Epictetus put it more bluntly in his lectures at Nicopolis. "You go to the bathhouse with 50 people and call them friends? You share wine with a dozen men and call them companions? Then one day you need help and discover you were drinking alone the entire time." Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us go through life surrounded by companions while remaining completely friendless. We're socially active but emotionally isolated. We have full calendars but empty hearts. The lack of friends doesn't mean you're unpopular. It means you've been settling for shallow connections instead of demanding depth. Look at your contact list right now. How many of those people know your actual struggles? How many could you call at 3 a.m. with a real problem? How many would help you move, bail you out, tell you hard truths you don't want to hear? That number is your actual friend count. For most people it's 0 or 1. And the Stoics would say that's your starting point for building something real. The lack of friends means you haven't developed yourself enough to attract them. Seneca wrote something that sounds harsh until you understand it. "A man who does not make new friends as he goes through life will soon find himself alone." But before we ask others to love us, we must become lovable. Notice what he's saying. The lack of friends isn't primarily about other people failing you. It's about you not yet being the kind of person that deep friendship requires. What kind of person does deep friendship require? Seneca laid it out clearly. Honesty even when it's uncomfortable, reliability in crisis, self-sufficiency that doesn't burden others needlessly, wisdom worth consulting, character worth respecting, and loyalty that survives difficulty. When Seneca served as Nero's advisor from 54 to 62 AD, he watched the young emperor destroy every friendship through his own character flaws. Nero was paranoid, so he suspected friends of betrayal. He was volatile, so friends never knew which version of him they'd encounter. He was selfish, so every relationship became transactional. By 65 AD, when Nero ordered mass executions of alleged conspirators, he had no friends left. He destroyed them all through his own undeveloped character. Epictetus taught this through personal example. As a slave with a crippled leg and no social status, he had nothing external to offer potential friends. Yet he developed such wisdom, integrity and strength of character, that after gaining freedom around 93 AD, Rome's most educated and powerful men sought him out as a friend and teacher. He told his students, "You want friends? Stop asking what others can do for you, and start asking what you're worth as a friend. Are you honest or do you flatter? Are you reliable, or do you disappear when it's inconvenient? Are you growing in wisdom or stagnating in mediocrity? Do you challenge your friends to be better or enable their worst habits?" Marcus Aurelius examined his own capacity for friendship ruthlessly. He wrote, "The best way to avenge yourself is to not be like them." He meant that when others disappointed him as friends, his response wasn't bitterness, but self-improvement. He focused on becoming the kind of friend he wished others had been to him. Here's your uncomfortable mirror. Could you be a true friend to yourself? Would you want to be friends with someone exactly like you? If you're honest and the answer is no, that's not an insult. It's a map showing you exactly where to grow. The lack of friends means you have work to do on yourself. Develop honesty that others can trust. Build reliability that others can depend on. Cultivate wisdom that others value. Demonstrate loyalty that others can count on. As you become that person, you'll naturally attract the rare others who've done the same work. The lack of friends means you're ready to understand self-sufficiency. Epictetus taught what sounds like a paradox. The person who needs no one is ready for true friendship. Students would protest that this made no sense. Friendship requires need, doesn't it? No, Epictetus insists, friendship requires choice, not need. When you need friends, you accept poor substitutes. When you don't need friends, you can choose wisely. As a slave, Epictetus had no choice about companion. He was forced into proximity with other slaves, with his master's household, with whoever occupied his space. He couldn't choose based on character, because he had no freedom to choose at all. This forced him to develop complete emotional self-sufficiency. When he gained freedom, this self-sufficiency didn't make him a hermit. It made him capable of real friendship for the first time. He no longer needed people to fill his loneliness, validate his worth, or provide emotional stability. He could choose friends based purely on mutual growth and character, not desperate need. Marcus Aurelius expressed this perfectly. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, not the quality of your friendships, not the quantity of your companion. The quality of your thoughts, which you control completely regardless of who's around you. This wasn't cold isolation. Marcus had close friends throughout his life, particularly his old teacher Fronto and his adoptive father Antoninus Pius. But his happiness didn't depend on them. When Fronto disagreed with him, Marcus wasn't devastated. When Antoninus died in 61 AD, Marcus grieved but didn't collapse. His center was in himself, not in others. Seneca put it most clearly in a letter to Lucilius. The wise man is self-sufficient. This does not mean that he desires no friendship. Rather, it means that he can do without friends, not that he wishes to do without them. Here's what this means practically. You're alone. That loneliness is pushing you to accept shallow connections, toxic relationships, or one-sided friendships, just to fill the void. The Stoic path is counterintuitive. Stop trying to fill the void with people, fill it with yourself. Develop interests that fascinate you alone. Build skills that satisfy you without audience. Create routines that give structure without social validation. Cultivate thoughts that engage you without needing to share them. Become so complete in yourself that friendship becomes luxury rather than necessity. This isn't giving up on connection, it's preparing for real connection. When you no longer need friends desperately, you can finally recognize and build friendships wisely. The lack of friends forces you to build the foundation of self-sufficiency that makes true friendship possible. The lack of friends means you're being protected from worse than loneliness. Seneca wrote something that sounds cynical until you've lived it. Loneliness is painful, but betrayal, disappointment, and the slow poison of false friendship are worse. Sometimes the gods protect us through isolation. When Seneca was exiled to Corsica in 41 AD, he lost all his Roman friends overnight. The men who'd shared his dinners, praised his speeches, and sought his company disappeared completely. He could have seen this as abandon. Instead, he wrote to his mother, "I have lost nothing that was truly mine. I have only lost what was borrowed and must eventually be returned." This exile taught Seneca that his Roman friends had been attracted to his proximity to power, not to his character. Losing them was painful, but it was also clarifying. It showed him who everyone actually was, including himself. Marcus Aurelius faced something similar when Avidius Cassius rebelled in. Many senators who'd proclaimed friendship quietly supported the rebellion, hedging their bets on who would win. When Marcus defeated Cassius without civil war, these false friends suddenly reappeared with elaborate explanations. Marcus could have punished them, but he did something more powerful. He noted their character, kept them at distance, and wrote, "The best revenge is to not be like them." He understood that their betrayal had actually protected him, by showing their nature before he trusted them with anything important. Epictetus taught students, before you get angry about being abandoned, ask whether you were actually connected to anything worth keeping. Often, what feels like rejection is actually exposure of a relationship that was already hollow. The modern trap is accepting harmful relationships rather than facing loneliness. You stay friends with someone who constantly undermines you, because being alone feels worse. You maintain toxic connections because you fear having no connection. You tolerate disrespect because you've confused it with companionship. The Stoic view is radical. Loneliness is temporary and curable. Bad friendships inflict lasting damage. The person who makes you feel small, the friend who shares your secret, the companion who disappears during crisis, but reappears when you succeed. These aren't better than loneliness. They're worse. Your lack of friends might mean you've unconsciously recognized that the people available to you aren't worth the cost of connection. Your isolation might be your wisdom protecting you from relationships that would drain rather than sustain you. Don't fill the void with just anyone. Better to be alone and whole than connected and diminished. The right people will eventually appear, but only if you've protected yourself from the wrong ones long enough to recognize the difference. Seneca corresponded with Lucilius for years, possibly never meeting him in person after their initial acquaintance. Yet Seneca called him his closest friend, and wrote 124 letters of profound philosophical depth to him. Marcus Aurelius considered the long-dead philosophers his truest companion. He wrote, "Everywhere I turn I see the works of the gods, and I find friends in the writings of those who understood what I'm experiencing." His deepest connections were with Epictetus, who he never met, and Homer, who lived 800 years earlier. Epictetus told students, "You feel alone. You have Socrates, Diogenes, and Zeno as companions. Every time you open their works, you have everyone who's ever struggled with the same questions you're struggling with. You're part of a conversation that spans centuries." This sounds like a consolation prize until you experience. A book that truly understands you creates connection more real than most face-to-face relationships. A philosophical principle that speaks to your exact situation provides companionship more reliable than most people. The lack of friends in your immediate circle might mean you're meant to find your people elsewhere, not geographically elsewhere, but temporally or intellectually elsewhere. Your tribe might be scattered across cities, countries, or even centuries. The internet has made this easier, but the Stoics proved it was always possible. Seneca found deep friendship through letters. Marcus found it through books. Epictetus found it through ideas that connected him to students across generations. None of them let their physical isolation define their actual connectedness. Consider, the author whose work changed your life is your friend, even if they're dead. The community online that understands your struggles provides real connection, even if you never meet in person. The historical figures who faced what you're facing offer genuine companionship through their examples. Your lack of local friends might be redirecting you toward the deeper connections available when you stop limiting friendship to geography and chronology. Build relationships with ideas, with works, with the scattered community of people throughout time and space who share your values and questions. This isn't settling. It's recognizing that the deepest connections exist at the level of mind and character, not proximity and convenience. Once you understand this, you'll never feel completely alone again, even if your phone never rings. The lack of friends means it's time to become your own best companion. The final Stoic lesson about friendlessness is the most challenging. You must become the kind of person you'd want to spend time with. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively to himself because he was practicing being good company for himself. His meditations weren't meant for publication. They were conversations with himself, reminders about who he wanted to be, reflections on his own character. He wrote, "Nowhere can a person find a more peaceful refuge than in their own soul." But he also knew that your soul is only a refuge if you've cultivated it. If your internal life is chaos, judgment, anxiety, and self-loathing, then being alone with yourself is torture, not refuge. Epictetus put this starkly: who do you spend the most time with? Yourself. Are you good company? Most people avoid being alone because they're terrible company for themselves. They need constant distraction from their own thoughts through entertainment,
substances, or other people. The lack of friends forces confrontation with this reality. When there's no one to distract you, you face yourself. Is that face pleasant? If not, that's the real problem to solve. Seneca wrote to Lucilius about this extensively. You say you're lonely. Cultivate yourself until you'd pay to spend time with someone like you. He listed specific practices. Read philosophy daily, so your thoughts become interesting. Practice virtue, so your character becomes admirable. Develop skills, so your time becomes productive. Cultivate gratitude, so your perspective becomes pleasant. Here's your practical path. Spend one day completely alone without any external input. No phone, no TV, no music, no reading. Just you and your thoughts for 12 hours. If that sounds unbearable, you've identified the core problem. You're not good company for yourself yet. Then start building. Have conversations with yourself. Through journaling. Challenge your own ideas. Question your own assumptions. Comfort yourself during difficulty, the way a good friend would. Celebrate your own victories. Forgive your own failures. Become the companion you've been seeking externally. When you're genuinely good company for yourself, something magical happens. You stop radiating desperate need for others to fill your void. That desperation repels quality people. Its absence attracts. By becoming your own best companion, you become capable of attracting real friends. Marcus Aurelius died in 80 AD in a military camp, far from Rome's social scene, with his philosophical practice as his primary companion. Epictetus died around 35 AD, probably attended by former students rather than family or childhood friends. None of them accumulated massive friend networks. All of them cultivated deep, meaningful connections with the rare few worthy of that name. More importantly, all of them became so self-sufficient, so internally complete, that friendship enhanced their lives without defining them. The lack of friends doesn't mean you're broken, unlikable, or doomed to loneliness. It means you're at a crossroads. You can panic and fill the void with shallow substitutes, or you can use this clarity to build something real. Self-sufficiency first, then selective deep connections with the rare few who match your developed character. Your loneliness is information, not condemnation. It's telling you to stop confusing quantity with quality, companionship with friendship, and entertainment with connection. It's inviting you to become so complete in yourself that you need no one, which paradoxically makes you ready for the true friendships that require no need. Start today. Stop counting contacts and start evaluating character, including your own. Stop trying to be popular and start trying to be worthy. Stop seeking friends desperately and start building the self-sufficiency that makes real friendship possible. The Stoics proved this path works. Now walk it yourself. If this video challenged how you think about friendship and loneliness, share it with someone who's struggling with isolation. Subscribe to Stoic Forge for more uncomfortable truths that lead to real freedom. Your journey from loneliness to wisdom starts with understanding what your lack of friends is actually teaching you. Listen to that lesson. It's the beginning of everything.